Alright y'all, hey, and what's up, and welcome to Okwe Sees the World, and I'm Okwe, and once again y'all, I'm here to check the world in love. Last week, y'all, the universe tried me, right? I did not post a video because I low-key wanted to see if Jesus was just gonna be like, y'all messed up, I need to just go on ahead and just hit reset. But since he did not, in fact, hit reset on the entire universe, we have an election to talk about, and so that's what we're gonna do. And honestly, I'm just gonna start off by saying, America, I am checking you, and I'm not really sure if it's in love or if it's in like deep like side eye or if it's in like how did this happen. But you know what, it is what it is, and I'm here to just sort of like unload some of my thoughts and feelings about this election. But I also hope that by talking about a book that I read, I'll be able to inject some positivity and at least a little bit of perspective as we move and begin working towards next steps. So I would really be interested to hear in the comments below what some of the things that y'all did to like take care of yourselves before, during, and now after this election. So one of the things that I did to take care of myself during the course of this election cycle was I read. One book that I read recently is this book called Think Like a Freak, and it's by Stephen Levitt and Stephen Dubner. And trust and believe me when I tell you, this is the absolute last and final place that I thought that I would find anything even resembling perspective as we begin to look towards like, all right, now what do we do? But in this book, there's a chapter called How to Persuade People Who Do Not Want to Be Persuaded. So the authors gave a couple tips and pointers as to what the process is for persuading people who do not want to be persuaded. And as a progressive, as a person who was very disappointed with the results of this election, I'm definitely reeling and emotionally trying to heal, but I'm also like, all right, y'all, we got midterm elections coming up. We need to get started. So that's really what this book has allowed me to reflect on, right? Like what are the next steps? One of the things that the authors talked about was how difficult it is to change people's minds. So throughout the course of this election, there was so much conversation about like, oh, the people on this side vote outside of their economic interest, or like, oh, these liberals are so high and mighty and haughty and things like that. Like, everyone is so deeply stuck and deeply rooted in their own opinions that like it's very difficult for you to then make an argument that someone is going to want to hear. It's just the way that it is, right? There are people who don't believe in climate change. They are able to pull out their facts and their knowledge and their things in the same way that we're able to pull out our facts and our knowledge and our things. Even if you believe that you are justified in feeling how you feel, the other side feels exactly the same way. So number one, it's hard to change people's minds, and ain't nothing that a book can do to change that sad, harsh reality. Sometimes persuasion is difficult, and you're just gonna have to jump right in there. And as progressives begin to think about next steps and like, where do we go from here, just understand that we're going to be engaging in some really, really difficult conversations. So that's the first thing that I just think is really important to like just get out there. So tip number 2 that these authors gave was that it is not about you, it's about the other person or the other individual whose mind you're trying to persuade. You have your facts, they have their facts. But obviously it would appear that one side was more effective in conveying their message and getting their things across. Essentially, they won because they persuaded more people to get to buy what they were selling. And so why this is important is because throughout the course of this election in particular, there was a whole lot of like intellectual cluster loving that was happening within the progressive community about, oh, why we are right, why the racism and the bigotry of the other side is not going to win out. Well, you got to convince other people that. So what ended up happening is that we as liberals, we as progressives, whatever, we was doing a lot of key, ha, talking, and not really engaging with the other side and not really doing this work of convincing and persuading other people. So if you spend all this time quoting all this facts, doing all this talking, and another person's not persuaded, you've not done your job, and you've just spit a whole lot and released a whole bunch of unnecessary CO2 into the air, and Leonardo DiCaprio would not be pleased with you. I'm just saying. The second tip that the authors gave was that you have to engage with the flaws of your own argument. Listen, I think Hillary Rodham Clinton is one badass mamma jamma. I think she caught way more flack than any person running for any office has ever caught in her entire life. I think that she is capable, she's smart, she is intelligent, she's done amazing things throughout the course of her career, but she's not perfect, right? And I think that we really as progressives struggled with really engaging with the negative elements of her persona as our elected leader. Now, it's real easy to look at the other little glass house over yonder and be like, this is what's wrong with you, this is what's wrong with you, this is what's wrong with you. But we need to do a little bit of soul searching. We really need to understand and engage with the negative elements of our party. They're gonna come for you, as they did throughout the course of this election. You have to be ready for it. So that's tip number 2. Tip numero 3 that the authors suggested was that it's really important that you acknowledge the strength of your opponent's arguments. Listen, we live in this incredibly polarized country, this incredibly polarized world, and to even sort of like shrug your shoulders and be like, wow, maybe you are right, or maybe there are certain elements of your argument that are right. It's just like, it's not happening that way. Now, to that end, here's what I will say. DJT as an individual, I'm not making near one excuse for him. He knew exactly what he was doing. He really tapped into the worst part of people. And sometimes I'm gonna be so far as to say that his supporters, they got a little bit caught up in the hate and the vitriol and the bigotry of this election, such that they're more like legitimate economic woes, right? I'm like, I'm sorry, I can't see you past the racism. I can't hear you past the BS. And that's something that I will acknowledge for myself, right? It got very difficult to acknowledge the fact that, like, you know, there are a lot of people who are struggling out here. There are a lot of people for whom the glitz and glamour of the tech bubble and globalization, it's just not popping for them in the same way. On top of that, the educational system is not popping, right? And people are really nervous and really worried that, like, wow, for the first time in American history, my kids might have it worse than I do. And like, that is an idea and an argument that really resonates with me as an immigrant, right? Like, my parents left their whole ass country to come to this country because they wanted life to be better for their children. And so living in a country like America that is a country of so much promise and that lives up to that promise for some people but not for others is something that I think, economically speaking, really resonates with me. Now, in that same breath, I can then flip around and be like, well, y'all, if you can make that and if you can understand that argument, economically speaking, do you understand how people in like the Black Lives Matter movements have basically been saying that, right? Like, this country has and holds so much promise for X number of people, but it doesn't want to hold it for me. So it's really, I think, important for both sides moving forward. To number 3, keep in mind and acknowledge the strengths of your opponent's arguments. And I know for a fact, none of us did that effectively through the course of this election. So after we've acknowledged the strengths of our opponent's arguments, these authors suggest that in the course of trying to persuade someone who does not want to be persuaded, it is very important that you keep the insults to yourself. I low-key almost wish that I reviewed this book before all the primaries, before all the mess, right? Like, I really wish that a lot of people would have excuse me. I really just wish that everyone would have just like been nice, you know, like all the name calling. I was just like, wow, really? How, Sway? And I'm not even talking about no fluffy like, oh, we're all humans. It's just like, that's just rude. Like, some of the things that people were saying were just like rude and in fact, like, just not factual. It's really important that we keep the insults to ourselves. I'm all about arguing policy. I'm all about, you can even disagree and have some really legitimate concerns about, like, all right, if you believe this, what does that say about how you live your life, how you raise your children? There are legitimate questions and concerns that can be raised, right? But just some of the insults that were raised. And so I think that the authors are correct in reminding us that if you really want to do the work of persuading someone, you got to meet them here and not like at a place of anger and hate. So the 5th and final tip that the authors give And one that really resonated with me as I sort of calm down and bring it together is just like this entire election cycle, we lost our ability to tell stories. One of the things that drew me to President Obama's campaign, both in 2008 and 2012, was his ability to like always connect the stories that he was telling to an individual person, right? There were moms in Missouri who were struggling after a divorce to understand what their healthcare options were. There were veterans, not that much older than me or my siblings at the time, who had come back from Iraq and Afghanistan maimed, who were struggling with PTSD. Behind all of the issues that we were talking about, there were people. There were people who mattered. There were people who had struggled, and there were people who were just looking for a system to support them. And throughout the course of this election, there's been very, very little of that. There have been very few attempts to try to reconnect the humanity of people. Beyond just making us feel good, stories challenge our ideas. They challenge our assumptions. They force us to see the humanity in these ideas that we otherwise would have fought. It's not about affirming or confirming or telling an anecdote that makes the other side seem so crazy. It's about learning. It's about hearing, and it's about challenging the way that we see our own world. So to the extent that I am now more emboldened than ever to get back on my progressive high horse and really push America back on what I think is a path toward more egalitarian ideals and systems and structures that really work for everyone, I'm gonna get back to the core of the people behind these stories. I'm not fighting just for the sake of fighting. I'm fighting because I really truly believe that people's lives deserve to be better. And so with that being said, I hope you enjoyed these 5 tips for how to persuade people who do not want to be persuaded, as presented to us by Steven Squared in Think Like a Freak. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I'm done. So actually it's so funny because like I said, I did not post a video but then a friend of mine was like, girl, where was you at last week? I was waiting. You told me you'd be coming every week, and I was like, you love me. So for the rest of you all who love me, you should comment below, subscribe.